Too hot to handle, too cold to hold. They called the Ghostbusters, now they're in control. Had them throwing a party for a bunch of children. And all the while, the slime was under the building. So they packed up their group, got a grip, came equipped, grabbed their proton packs off their backs, and they split. Found out about Vigo, the master of evil. Tried to battle my boys? That ain't legal. Hey there and welcome to the channel. My name is Gil Garcia and today I'm reviewing for you Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, the follow-up to 2021's Ghostbusters Afterlife. Ghostbusters Frozen Empire is written and directed by Gil Keenan as well as Jason Reitman. The film stars Paul Rudd as Gary, Carrie Coon as Callie, Finn Wolfhard as Trevor, and McKenna Grace as Phoebe. When the discovery of an ancient artifact unleashes an evil force, Ghostbusters new and old must join forces to protect their home and save the world from a second ice age. As a child of the 90s, who didn't love Ghostbusters? Ghostbusters was one of my favorite movies growing up, and I remember vividly days where my aunt would come over. She'd bring over Ghostbusters 1 and 2, we'd watch it religiously, and we'd fall asleep to it. We were very young. She'd even call my little brother Slimer, and that was his nickname growing up. I have a big soft spot for these films, as does a lot of people. This has a very fervent fan base. So naturally, in 2016, when they decided to reboot the film, I wasn't openly against it at first, but after watching the finished product, I think that it did a disservice to the original films. The original films, you see, weren't slapstick comedy. They were slow burns. They took their time building the characters, introducing each and individual one of the Ghostbusters, and what they brought to the table. Egon was a scientist, Ray was a historian, Peter was the charismatic one, and Winston was the street smart / muscle. Each and every single one of these characters plays a big role in the overall picture of things, and the thing that 2016's film didn't get right was that the characters had no specialties of their own. They were all just really good at everything. And not to mention, the original film had some horror elements to it. You don't get that from 2016's. So naturally, when they announced that Afterlife was coming out in 2021, I was a bit skeptical. I wasn't sure how to feel about it. We've seen plenty of franchises from the 1980s kind of fall by the wayside. I'm talking about Terminator, Aliens, and so on and so forth. And Ghostbusters, they already had their chance to reboot it. I wasn't sure about this. But to my surprise, I actually really enjoyed Afterlife. I think that it did a good job of blending nostalgia with current modern sensibilities in terms of comedy. I liked all the new characters they introduced. McKenna Grace's Phoebe, Finn Wolfhard, Podcast, and Paul Rudd, of course. Who doesn't love Paul Rudd? So I felt like they had the groundworks for something special. Bringing back the Ghostbusters in a third film, dating back to the 1984 and 1989 films, was a good idea. Plus, they got Jason Reitman involved, the son of the original director, Ivan Reitman. So I knew that this was a movie that was going to handle the new characters and the old characters with care. Some people may complain that Afterlife leans too heavily on the nostalgia part, but come on, it's Ghostbusters. It doesn't need to be an Academy Award-winning film. It just needs to entertain us and remind us of how good the original ones were. And I think Afterlife did that very well. Afterlife laid the groundwork for this franchise to take off. It gave us new characters to root for, a new direction, and most importantly, it was honoring the past. So with Frozen Empire's first trailer, I was a bit skeptical. I wasn't sure of how to feel about this movie. It looks so far different from anything we've seen from the Ghostbusters franchise before this, and that's kind of a good thing, because one criticism of Ghostbusters 2 that I still hold to this date is that it still very much follows the same plot line as the first Ghostbusters, and even Afterlife had a little bit of that. So Frozen Empire was looking to do something completely original and something they've never done before. And I honestly can tell you that Frozen Empire, it's a very flawed movie. It doesn't capitalize on those highs that I was expecting from it, but it's not a disaster like Rotten Tomatoes wants you to believe. I think this is a movie that's incredibly flawed, but it does have some high marks and some entertaining moments after all. Returning to New York was a big step forward for this franchise. It allows a huge sandbox for them to catch ghosts, and it gets them into an environment that we're very familiar with. They could reference certain things in the original films and also capitalize on some of the new stuff. I think Frozen Empire is a bit of a missed opportunity in some aspects. Some characters don't return. Some characters are left by the wayside. I think Frozen Empire is a good enough entry to make you want to watch more, but it's not enough to stand on its own legs. So here are a couple of the things that I did like with Frozen Empire. First and foremost, this movie is a slow burn. Much like the original films and Ghostbusters Afterlife, this movie takes its time building the world, getting us back into the firehouse, introducing the new characters, and introducing us to the ghost. And one thing that the 2016 version did wrong, as I mentioned before, is that it didn't take its time. It was all about bit, comedy, comedy, look at this person fall down. This movie, it has fewer jokes, but the jokes do land pretty well. One other thing I really liked about this movie is that it went back to some of the horror routes. There are some scenes that are actually pretty scary in here. And that's what I loved about the original film. Because I watched it at a young age in the 1990s, I was freaked out the first time I saw the librarian ghost. And things like that are good callbacks here. We see a lot more horror elements at play. And that's something that I desperately have wanted out of a Ghostbusters film. This movie delivers on that. The visual effects look pretty good. The practical effects look really good. And there's a nice style to this movie that Afterlife was sorely missing because it was taking place in a farm, whereas this one takes place back in New York, so there's a lot more hijinks that could take place here. Let's talk about the returning characters. As always, Paul Rudd is very good in this movie. He lands the comedic bits the most in this film, as well as Kumail Nanjiani, and we'll get to him in a little bit. But what really surprised me is how well they handled Ernie Hudson and Dan Aykroyd. Both characters are in their prime, and there's a good back and forth between the two regarding their golden years, so to speak. And I like the little character arc they go through in this film. I like that they had more screen time and more of a presence in this story than they did in the previous one. I think that they're acting very well. Despite their advanced age, I think Dan Aykroyd still has it. And Ernie Hudson especially looks like he hasn't aged a day. He looks great in this movie. As for Bill Murray, though, that's the big question mark. Is Bill Murray a big part of this film? Unfortunately, he is not. He only comes up for maybe one or two scenes, does his little line of dialogue, his shtick, and then he's out. I think at this point in his career, he's kind of over the whole cameo thing, but he still cashes in a pretty fat paycheck, so good on you, Bill. So I've kind of prattled on about the things I loved about this film without really going into the negatives. So now I want to talk about some of the things that didn't work, because this movie is not very good. It's fun, but it's not very good. And a lot of that stems from what they did with the new characters. Phoebe takes a major step back in her character development in this film. Much like a lot of sequels, they do this whole thing where the character can no longer use their powers, so to speak. Phoebe, same thing. They remove her from the proton pack and get her out of the Ghostbusters through this film. And the journey that she goes on in this film is a little weird. She endangers the entire city because of her own desires, and call it teenage angst or whatever, but I found it a bit cringe. And I think for a character that I actually really liked in Ghostbusters Afterlife, having this character take a major U-turn in her character development is not very good for me. And I liked her a lot there. I didn't like her in this movie. Let's also talk about Trevor, played by Finn Wolfhard. He's a good kid. I saw a lot of Timothée Chalamet in him. I thought he was going to be the next great Hollywood actor, especially because of how good he is in Stranger Things. As a child actor, he was phenomenal in that series. But he's been very, very mediocre in these two films. Both of them, in fact. He gets taken a major backseat in this film, and you don't see a lot of him. When you do see him, he's not funny, he's not charismatic, he's nothing. He's just a blank slate of a character. I don't know what is going on with his agency or how he's landed these roles. He's making a lot of money, don't get me wrong, but I think that he's not taking any creative risks here. This is a character that's so bland and so generic, and you kind of forget that he's in the film altogether. I think Finn Wolfhard has a lot of potential to be a good Hollywood A-lister, but this movie did not work for him, and I hope that if he comes back for the third film, he brings a little bit more to the table, because he flat out sucked in this movie. I mentioned the new characters quite a bit ago. I think that Kumail Nanjiani is one of the new characters that provides the most into the story. He's very funny, but at sometimes he can break the severity of the situation that they're in and break the immersion altogether. Some people will really like this, some people will really hate this. I found it to be a mixed bag. I like Kumail Nanjiani as a character and as a person, but in this movie, he maybe should have toned it down just a little bit. Overall, I still think you'll enjoy his part to play in this film. Patton Oswalt is a throwaway character, doesn't really have much to do here, which is a shame because he could have added something really great to this film. One more thing I want to hit on with this review is the villain. I felt like this character is severely underdeveloped. Despite the fact that they took the whole runtime to build up the mystery of the character, I think the design is cool. I think his evil plan makes sense. But the overall comeuppance and his arrival, so to speak, into New York City, it's not very cathartic. It's very rushed, and he only appears for the final 15 minutes of the film. I would have liked to have seen more out of this character, especially considering all the chaos that had gone throughout the entire runtime. His arrival and his comeuppance is very underwhelming, and I kind of wish that they would have saved him off for a third film or just introduced him much sooner in this film. Ghostbusters Frozen Empire gets a 2.5 out of 5. I don't think that this movie is offensive, but I also don't think it's great. This is the kind of film you'll throw on during the holidays when the in-laws are over. It's a film that you could talk over if you'd like and you won't miss a beat. There's also a lot of fun to be had, too, for the kids. I still am on board for a third film in this franchise. I want to see where they could take these characters, and I hope that they explore more of the darkness behind these ghosts. If you want to go watch Ghostbusters Frozen Empire this weekend, I want to hear from you. What did you think of the film? Sound off in the comment section below, and be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a video. I do a podcast every Tuesday here on the channel, as well as Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and the upcoming episode is for Frozen Empire, the spoiler-filled review. Thank you all for watching, and go catch a movie.